2002 was a big year for WWE as they tried to rebuild after the massive disappointment that was the invasion. Now without any serious competition, the wrestling monopoly thought, screw it, we'll be our own competition, and finally went ahead with the brand splits, assigning Raw and SmackDown their own rosters and creative teams. A little shaky in the beginning, the split soon took shape and gave each show an identity. It also gave opportunities for previously underutilized talents to break out from the chasing pack and become bigger stars, in theory anyway. And WWE needed new stars, since The Rock had one foot in Hollywood and Steve Austin decided to quit the company cold turkey, the result of months of creative frustrations and physical burnout. WWE, sensing they needed a shot in the arm early in the calendar, brought back the NWO to very mixed results and a hostile reception from the boys in the back. There were more successful comebacks, such as the return of Shawn Michaels, who rolled back the years by returning as a changed man, but still a remarkable performer. 2002 was also about looking to the future as well as the past, as Brock Lesnar had one of the best first years ever, and WWE laid the groundwork for the Ruthless Aggression era by introducing John Cena, Batista, and Randy Orton. Lots to talk about and 14 pay-per-views to chart it all. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and this is every WWE pay-per-view of 2002 ranked from worst to best. Join us. Number 14, Insurrection. Bottom of the list is another of WWE's half-assed excursions to the UK. It's quite funny that, for years and years now, fans have begged WWE to host a pay-per-view in Britain, perhaps forgetting that, for a while, that meant shows like Insurrection. The most interesting thing coming out of this one was nothing that happened in the ring, but rather on the flight home, the infamous plane ride from hell. As for the show, the best match on it was the first one, an intercontinental title affair between Eddie Guerrero and Rob Van Dam that, while good, was one of their lesser televised bouts from this time. Everything else was either dull or outright bad. Trish Stratus and Jacqueline against Molly Holly and Jazz was standard, Bradshaw vs X-Pac was bleh, a hardcore title match with Stevie Richards and Booker T was what you would expect, Brock Lesnar for some reason teamed with Shawn Stasiak to take on the Hardys in a short match, William Regal was once again besmirched in his European title bout with Spike Dudley, and Big Show vs Steve Austin should have been much better. And the main event of Triple H vs The Undertaker was much worse than you would expect, given the talent involved. 2002 was not a banner year for either of those old war horses, and it was clear that, based on this show, Raw was still some way from finding its feet. Number 13, King of the Ring. The big news leading into the King of the Ring pay-per-view was the departure of Stone Cold Steve Austin, whose exit threw the company into chaos. The Texas Rattlesnake had been due to work with Eddie Guerrero on the show, but he ended up being replaced with Ric Flair. Latino Heat and the Nature Boy had themselves a perfectly good match, marred by unnecessary interference, but still one of the better things on a pretty poor show. In the main event, the Game and the Dead Man once again stunk the joint out, although to be fair to Triple H, he was working through a bad elbow injury, and The Undertaker was also rather knackered at this point. Again, way overbooked and a bad way to end the show. In other major happenings, Kurt Angle cleanly tapped out Hulk Hogan, which was shocking at the time. More shocking still, the match was actually really good, thanks in the main to our Olympic hero. Brock Lesnar won the King of the Ring, pinning Rob Van Dam in a short finals. The next big thing had beaten Test in another short outing earlier in the night, while RVD and Chris Jericho kicked off the show in style with a long and competitive match. Elsewhere, 2 title changes went down, with Molly Holly beating Trish Stratus for the women's belt and Jamie Noble downing the Hurricane for the cruiserweight strap. The genuine highlight of the whole show, though, was definitely The Rock's interaction with Booker T and Goldust. Number 12, No Way Out. No Way Out was all about the return of the original NWO, seen for the first time in a WWE ring. Hulk Hogan, Scott Hall, and Kevin Nash were back, and boy were they neutered. This was not the New World Order of 1996, the renegade outfit that ran roughshod over WCW and did what they wanted when they wanted to. This was the sanitized WWE version of the group, who made their big entrance with a generic promo and then were completely upstaged in a backstage segment with The Rock. For the bridge between Royal Rumble and Wrestlemania, the show actually had some blockbuster matches on offer, with Steve Austin vs Chris Jericho, Triple H vs Kurt Angle with Stephanie as special guest ref, and The Rock vs Undertaker making a pretty star power heavy triple main event. The Brahma Bull got a good match out of the Phenom, even if it went a little too long. Kurt and Trips had their customarily decent match, even if the real feud was between the Cerebral Assassin and his wife. And Jericho retained his undisputed title against Austin thanks to interference from, you guessed it, the Boys in Black and White. The match was fine. Elsewhere, the APA won a fun tag team turmoil match. Rob Van Dam beat Goldust in an odd clash of styles. Taz and Spike Dudley, remember that team, retained their tag team titles against Booker T and Test. And William Regal retained his Intercontinental title over Edge in a clunky brass knuckles on a pole match. Number 11, Armageddon. It's the end of the world as we know it, and Triple H is once again World Heavyweight Champion. Battling his buddy Shawn Michaels in the 3 Stages of Hell topliner, the game survived a street fight, cage, and then ladder match to walk out as champ. Though entertaining in parts, the match was simply too long, almost 40 minutes in fact, and could have lost 10 of those and been just as good, if not better. You certainly can't fault the effort, even if you can find issue with HBK's silly little boy's haircut. On the undercard, Kurt Angle won the WWE title by beating Big Show 1 month after the world's largest athlete had captured the title. Their match was good. Chris Benoit beat Eddie Guerrero in a grand match to determine the #1 contender to the WWE title. The fans may have been somewhat indifferent to the action, but you can't discount the technique or intensity on display from 2 of the world's best. Booker T and Goldust finally won the World Tag Team titles by surviving a 4-team elimination match, also featuring the Dudley Boys, Lance Storm and William Regal, and Chris Jericho and Christian. Great match for sure, but an even better moment. Edge got a lame disqualification victory over A-Train in a humdrum contest, Batista got a big victory over Kane, though the match was rotten, and Victoria retained the women's title in a fair triple threat with Jackie and Trish. Number 10, Rebellion. Though the Raw crew left the UK earlier in the year, having not exactly covered themselves in glory, the boys and girls from the Blue brand could walk back through customs with their heads held high, because Rebellion was an enjoyable show. The show started with a surprise, as Raw's Booker T, drafted in to make up for the absence of The Undertaker, who was off the show due to the imminent arrival of his child, beat Matt Hardy in a good back and forth battle. Then John Cena teamed up with Dawn Marie to lose to Billy Kidman and Tori Wilson, a match notable since it was one of the last before Cena became the Doctor of Thugonomics and was perhaps the only ever on-screen acknowledgement of Tori and Kidman's real-life romance. Funaki vs Crash Holly was standard house show comedy stuff, but it was followed up with Tajiri, Rey Mysterio and Jamie Noble having themselves a dandy of a triple threat cruiserweight title elimination match stuffed with neat spots and sequences. Noble retained. I mean, the show was good, but let's not go crazy and start adding title changes or anything now. The 2 makeshift teams of Devon Dudley and Ron Simmons and the Big Val Boski and Chuck Palumbo then had a match that happened before Rikishi beat Albert in a predictable kiss my ass match. A-Train ate the butt. Hello. Then we thankfully got a genuine belter as Kurt Angle and Chris Benoit retained their tag team titles against Los Guerreros in a suplex and submission-filled extravaganza. In the main event, Brock Lesnar and Paul Heyman overcame Edge, Taker's replacement, in a good WWE title handicap match. Though he was unsuccessful on the night, the performance was a good sign of things to come from the rated R superstar. Number 9, Backlash. The first pay-per-view after the brand extension, Backlash ably demonstrated both the good and bad of the company during a period of transition. In the main event, Hulk Hogan, fueled by the power of nostalgia, won the undisputed title in a bad match against Triple H. Though fans were into the Hulkster's act, his reign would have an adverse effect on ratings, buy rates, and attendances thereafter. Another couple of the old guard who was struggling was Steve Austin and The Undertaker, who had an odd #1 contenders match won by the Dead Man. And Scott Hall got a win over Bradshaw in a really poor match that kind of spelled the end for the bad guy in the company. So that was the bad, but there was plenty of good to be found too, with an action-packed undercard full of hungry performers ready to make an impression. Tajiri beat Kidman in a fun and frenzied opener to win the Cruiserweight title. Brock Lesnar looked like an absolute killer in his stoppage victory over Jeff Hardy. Hardy, Eddie Guerrero announced his return to the big time by winning the Intercontinental title after dismantling RVD, and Edge looked like a surefire future singles star in his loss to wrestling machine Kurt Angle. In other happenings, Trish continued to show improvement in her loss to Jazz, and Billy and Chuck retained their tag titles over Tough Enough's finest. Number 8, WrestleMania 18. WrestleMania 18 had a lot going for it, with one genuine dream match on the card, lots of star power, and a red-hot stadium setting. Overall, though, the show failed to live up to its potential and was not really the sum of its parts. The Rock vs. Hulk Hogan was the main attraction and more than lived up to the hype. It wasn't an amazing wrestling masterpiece or anything, but you'd be hard-pressed to find anything that could match the energy and aura it created. Triple H and Chris Jericho certainly couldn't, especially after a build that turned Y2J into a cuckold and had him cleaning up dog mess instead of making him look like, you know, an undisputed champion. The action was decent, but the response was tepid, a lukewarm end to the game's redemption story. In other matches, Steve Austin beat Scott Hall in a match he had no desire to be in, and it showed. The Undertaker and Ric Flair had a passionate brawl that gave the dirtiest player in the game back some of the confidence that had been sapped from him in the dying days of WCW. Rob Van Dam won the Intercontinental title from William Regal in a short but sweet offering. DDP retained the European title against Christian in what has to be the highlight of his bungled WWE run. Kurt Angle beat Kane in a match that was good but felt thrown together. Edge beat Booker T in a match fought over a Japanese shampoo commercial, that classic storyline trope. Billy and Chuck retained their tag titles in a Four Corners match. Jazz retained her women's title against Trish and Lita, and the Hardcore title changed hands about 10 different times before ultimately finding its way to Maven, who was champ at the start of the night. Overall, a decent night of action, but disappointing given the fact that it's the showcase of the Immortals and all. Number 7, Unforgiven. Brock Lesnar's WWE title reign got off to a not quite impeccable start at Unforgiven. Though he looked good in his match with The Undertaker, the cheap disqualification finish and post-match beatdown at the hands of Big Evil did him no favours. Luckily, they would have a much better match under very different circumstances just a month later, but more on that in a little bit. Unlike Brock, who earned his title, Triple H was famously just simply awarded the World Heavyweight title by General Manager Eric Bischoff and faced his first test here against a resurgent Rob Van Dam. Their match was canny, won by Triple H when Ric Flair turned on Mr. Monday Night and joined up with his protege. Speaking of Flair, he was in action earlier in the show, losing to Chris Jericho by submission in a match that had the potential to be loads better, but had its moments nonetheless. In the best match on the show by a long way, Chris Benoit eked out a victory over Kurt Angle in a fantastic wrestling match that took fans a while to warm up to, but had them jumping up and down by the end. Eddie Guerrero pinned Edge in a damn fine effort that showed just how in the zone Guerrero was and just how ready Edge was to step it up. Trish Stratus beat Molly Holly to win the women's title, Team USA beat the Un-Americans in a solid and heated opener, and 3-minute warning beat Billy and Chuck, meaning, per the stipulation, that Stephanie would have to perform some HLA for Eric Bischoff later in the evening. Naturally, this whole ordeal ended with the Bish taking a big old stink face from Rikishi dressed in drag. Number 6, Vengeance. Vengeance 2002 was the night that finally, The Rock became a WWE champion again. Clashing with the undisputed champion The Undertaker and Kurt Angle, Rocky won the strap in a really entertaining match where everyone did everyone's finisher on everyone else. It may have been a brief run before going off to Hollywood, but it was nice to see the belt on the Great One once again, and the match is something of a lost gem. The rest of the show was up and down, but had a few bright spots. In the opener, Chris Benoit made his in-ring return after a year out with a neck injury, teaming up with Eddie Guerrero to lose to Bubba and Spike in a tables match. The Rabid Wolverine looked as sharp as ever. Jamie Noble retained the Cruiserweight title against Billy Kidman in a good match. Jeff Hardy and William Regal's European title match was abrupt, but there was some wacky chemistry there. John Cena got a big win over Chris Jericho, who fell pretty damn hard after losing the undisputed title. Brock Lesnar looked the best he had against Rob Van Dam in their Intercontinental title match. Booker T continued to gain momentum by beating Big Show in a short but spirited no DQ match, and Christian and Lance Storm won back their tag titles by dethroning the short-lived tandem of Edge and Hulk Hogan in a simple but eminently watchable bout. Number 5, Judgment Day. The Hulk Hogan experiment came to an end at Judgment Day, when the Hulkster dropped the undisputed title to The Undertaker in a really bad match with a terrible finish. Considering the feud leading into it featured Hogan being dragged around by a motorbike backstage and failing to escape on a malfunctioning Harley Davidson, it's somewhat apt that the whole charade ended with the worst chokeslam ever. In actual good matches, Kurt Angle lost a blinding hair versus hair match to Edge and then got the Kojak cut, Eddie Guerrero retained his Intercontinental title in another choice match with Van Dam, and Triple H vanquished Chris Jericho in a brutal Hell in a Cell match. Brock Lesnar continued his ascent up the card by teaming with Paul Heyman to beat the Hardys. Steve Austin continued to spin his wheels in a fun but ultimately meaningless handicap match with Flair and Big Show. Trish Stratus beat Stacy Keibler in a match where legs and black leather and blonde and sorry, got distracted there. Where was I? Rikishi's backside. That'll snap you out a bit. The Samoan teamed with Rico to beat Billy and Chuck for the tag belts, and I would like to recap the whole storyline, but life is way too short, and I'm not getting paid by the hour here, so let's just move on, shall we? Number 4, Royal Rumble. The Royal Rumble marked the grand return of Triple H, struck down months earlier with a torn quad. The game had rehabbed it hard in order to make it back in time for the pay-per-view, and to be honest, there was little doubt he would win the titular match and go on to headline WrestleMania. Not that there's anything wrong with that decision, because he was riding a real wave of momentum, helped by a new, even more rock-hard physique and soundtrack to U2's Beautiful Day. Though it had an obvious winner, the Rumble itself had some real standout moments, like the returns of Mr. Perfect and Goldust, the Hurricane trying to chokeslam the two-man power trip, and the shocking elimination of The Undertaker courtesy of Maven. In one of the other major matches on the card, Chris Jericho and The Rock had a breathtaking undisputed title match that gave hope for the Ayatollah of rock and roller's reign. Just wait until you meet Lucy, mate. Ric Flair wrestled his first WWE match in almost a decade, throwing down with Vince McMahon in an oddly captivating spectacle. Big pop for Flair and his win in Atlanta that night, to say the least. William Regal beat Edge to win the Intercontinental title. The match was different to the usual style of the time, and fans didn't quite know what to make of it, but it holds up well watching it back. Taz and Spike Dudley retained their tag team titles over Bubba and Devon in a short match that was good while it lasted, and ditto Trish Stratus and Jazz, who continued to change the women's division from clothes ripping to actual wrestling in their contest. Number 3, No Mercy. SmackDown continued to produce the goods at No Mercy, as we were well into Paul Heyman's celebrated reign as Booker, and the SmackDown 6 were in full swing. In the best match of the night, nay, the year, Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle beat Edge and Rey Mysterio in the finals of a tag team title tournament. Everything that is great about tag team wrestling, this was 4 of the best at the top of their game coming together to produce a masterpiece. Everyone ought to see it at least once. In fact, go and do it right now. Pause this video, go to the network, fire up No Mercy 2002, and I'll see you back here in half an hour. So, how was it? Good, right? A very different but also very good match headlined, with Brock Lesnar defending his WWE title against The Undertaker inside Hell in a Cell. Lots of violence and blood and hatred and all that good stuff here, and a big win for the Beast Incarnate as he started to solidify himself as a genuine main event player. Elsewhere on the show, Triple H's reign of terror continued with a victory over Kane. The match plodded along but got better towards the end, and it's much better if you remove any and all reference to Katie Vick. Rob Van Dam beat Triple H's lapdog, Ric Flair, in an awkward clash of styles that looked weird on paper and was weird in execution. Well, no surprises there then. Trish Stratus beat Victoria to retain her women's title in an alright match. Jamie Noble retained the Cruiserweight title against Tajiri in an expectedly solid bout. Noble and Nydia were low-key MVPs for the year, by the way, but maybe I'm biased because I live in a caravan and enjoy watching people gratuitously make out. Tori Wilson versus Dawn Marie was as good as you would expect, i.e. not very. Maybe things would be more interesting if, I don't know, Dawn shagged Tori's father to death or something. And Chris Jericho and Christian retained their tag team titles against Booker T and Goldust in a match that was going swimmingly until one of the bloody ropes broke. They improvised well enough, mind you, and got where they needed to go. Number 2, Survivor Series. A big-time show at a big-time arena with a first-time ever gimmick in the main event, Survivor Series just felt like a very special show. In said main event, Triple H put his World Heavyweight title on the line in the Elimination Chamber, defending it against Shawn Michaels, Kane, Chris Jericho, Booker T, and Rob Van Dam. What's funny about that lineup is that Triple H handily beat them all on pay-per-view over the course of a year. Haha, isn't it funny, guys? Not the greatest chamber match you'll ever see, this was still pretty damn tasty, as everyone involved went all out and beat the tar out of each other in a long and grueling contest. Especially so for the Game, who suffered a bad throat injury early on but gutted it out to the finish, where he lost to comeback kid Shawn Michaels. HBK winning a world title in Madison Square Garden in a pay-per-view main event? What is this, 1996? Speaking of 1996, Big Show was back amongst the gold as he beat Brock Lesnar in a necessarily short but lively match. Brock was working with a broken rib at the time. In a shocking twist, Paul Heyman turned on his charge, resulting in him dropping the WWE title. In perhaps the best match of the evening, Los Guerreros captured the WWE Tag Team titles by seeing off the rest of the SmackDown 6 in an elimination tag team match. These three teams had been routinely putting on clinics for months on television and pay-per-view, and this felt like the culmination of their work. In other matches, Bubba, Spike and Jeff Hardy beat 3-Minute Warning and Rico in an elimination tables match when Devon ran in to reunite the team. A great way to start the show, the match featured all manner of demented stunts and bumps. Billy Kidman ended Jamie Noble's surprisingly long reign as Cruiserweight Champion in a good high-flying showcase. Victoria beat Trish Stratus in a hard-nosed hardcore match to win her first women's title, and Scott Steiner made his WWE debut to wreck some fools and do some swears. Number 1. SummerSlam. One of the most consistently good WWE pay-per-views and one of the best SummerSlams ever, SummerSlam 2002 had plenty of major happenings and no real duds to speak of. In the main event, the torch was passed as Brock Lesnar became the youngest WWE champion in history when he beat The Rock on his way to becoming the biggest movie star in Hollywood for the undisputed title. Brock's best match ever to that point, the crowd were crying out for the next big thing to win. It was the right decision at the right moment, and props to Big Dwayne, he did more for Lesnar than just about anyone else in the rookie's debut year. In the other major match, Shawn Michaels wrestled for the first time in over 4 years, taking on Triple H in an unsanctioned match. Considering he was coming back from a broken back and what was supposed to have been career-ending surgery, a passable match would have been understandable and appreciated. But HBK, in his cowboy boots and blue jeans no less, turned in a match of the year performance, going above and beyond to steal the show and add another classic to his canon. In the opener, Rey Mysterio made his WWE pay-per-view debut and put on a stunner with Kurt Angle, who adapted to the newcomer's offense like a pro. Edge beat Eddie Guerrero in a good match, Christian and Storm retained their World Tag Team titles over Booker T and Goldust in another good one, Rob Van Dam won the Intercontinental title in a strong match with Chris Benoit, Ric Flair made Chris Jericho tap out in a fun match, and The Undertaker beat Test in one of the lanky Canadian's biggest matches ever. Top to bottom, you'd be hard-pressed to find a show as well-paced and rewarding as SummerSlam 2002, the best pay-per-view of the year.